Okay, thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to elaborate on this significant milestone for the country. You will recall that around 2010, we put together what we term an integrated resource plan for 2020, from 2010 to 2030. The integrated resource plan is a supply and demand plan for the country. In other words, what it does, it tries to project how much power we're going to need over the next 20 years. So in that plan, we sought to balance our needs as a country. In other words, our economic needs, and also, of course, in terms of reducing our emissions. So in that plan, we had indicated that we are going to deploy about 17,800 megawatts of renewable energy over the next 20 years to reduce our carbon footprint. As you are aware that most of our electricity comes from coal. So from that point of view then, we wanted to make sure then that we start implementing this integrated resource plan. And the start of implementation of that integrated resource plan was to start by deploying energy by 2016. So we went on a competitive bidding process, and we received about 52 bidders in the first round, which we have just signed. And out of that 52 bidders, 28 were preferred bidders, and government had to provide guarantees in that regard for those contracts to be signed. So definitely it was a historical moment.
All right, Richard?
Well, I'm glad to hear that the department isn't backing off from the 3,725 as an objective. I agree you can't, given all the delays in the process, because of the complications of moving from a feed-in tariff to a bidding process, there have been delays, and so one can't be unreasonable in the lead times that projects will require to come online. But I'm glad to hear that we're not actually tightening that limit on renewable energy into the future. But I do want to come back to this perception that we need new coal or nuclear for baseload demand. The baseload is basically the amount of power you want to have available constantly. No plant runs constantly. They all have outages planned and unplanned. So meeting baseload demand is a product of running a system effectively and efficiently, and renewables can make a far greater contribution to that system than has been envisaged in the IRP 2010, and that is why we are calling for a much larger allocation by 2030 when the IRP is revised.
All right. Let me bring in Andrew Kenny into this discussion. Andrew, then your thoughts about the signing a little earlier on this month.
All right. Just say some things beforehand. I believe that solar and wind are wonderful for a wide range of applications, marvelous applications: solar water heating, wind pumps on Karoo farms, supply of small-scale electricity in remote sites, clinics, schools, etc., etc. Solar and wind have wonderful applications. But for grid electricity, they are absolutely useless. For grid electricity, they're useless. And around the world, we've seen them failing in every single country that's been tried. So what this presents us with is one thing: increased electricity prices and problems on the grid. The idea that they can be used for baseload, as Mr. Worthington's saying, is completely wrong. They're useless for baseload power, and you can see it everywhere around the world. Take Britain, for example, which has got very good wind conditions. It's got 5,000 megawatts of wind capacity on the grid, 3,000 turbines, and you see these all together, all over Britain, going up and down in a completely erratic, unpredictable, violent sort of way, useless for baseload power.
Okay, but what are you suggesting in terms of where the renewable energy should be then in our integrated plan?
Well, it should be used for small-scale applications, not for grid electricity.
It shouldn't be involved in the baseload.
It's hopeless for baseload. Nothing. Renewables is absolutely hopeless for baseload. All it's going to do is push up electricity prices and put strain on the grid. As I said, wind, for example, there's violent fluctuations. If you look at the pattern of demand on the grid, it varies about 2 to 1 from maximum to minimum demand. If you look at the production of wind turbines, it can vary from hundreds of thousands to 1. Notice Eskom asking for this price increase, which I believe, by the way, is much too big. But what Eskom says, 3% of their price increase is to cope with the high price of renewables that they're going to be forced to accept. And the more renewables we have, the higher the prices are going to be.
All right. But let me ask the DG to respond to that, because, yes, indeed, we discussed the 16% that was asked by Eskom, and 3% of that will go to the independent power producers in order for them to assist in relation to the renewable energy. DG, please respond.
Okay. I think maybe, again, let me address the issue of baseload. It's not a perception that you need to support renewable energy. It's a fact. And these facts have been seen in countries like Germany. Germany abandoned its nuclear program, but their minister is of economic development is on record indicating that they're actually going to be building new coal-fired power plants. So effectively, a country like Germany, which is right there in the forefront of renewable energy, where we have learned quite a number of lessons from their own deployment of renewable energy. That simply means then that we definitely need to support our renewable energy until such time the technology has developed in a manner that is going to make sure that we do have baseload. We can see the development in the concentrating solar power, which is usually known as CSP, and we actually hope that in the next 2 to 3 years we should be able to have storage which can therefore compete with baseload. But until such time, the technologies have matured and also the price have come down significantly. I think we're still going to see quite a significant deployment of both coal, nuclear, or any other form of baseload.
Richard?
Yes, fortunately we do not do our planning according to what Mr. Kenny believes. We have institutions like the International Energy Agency that give us a far better indication of the performance of the different renewable energy technologies. Now, different generation technologies have their pros and cons, their different characteristics, but their performance is fairly well. For some of the technologies, their performance is pretty well known because they've been around and used for quite a long time. In the case of solar water heating, concentrated solar power with thermal storage, which can provide supply 24 hours if you want it to, although it depends how you configure the plant, we're not as confident of the performance because there's not been so much plant in commission. And that is, of course, an area where South Africa can become a world leader in solar concentrated thermal power generation. So if we configure that with storage, we can design the plant to dispatch when we need the power, such as into the evening peak. You design your plant according to how you expect to run it, and then you run your entire generation system to meet all of the demand. And so within that mix, there's a lot of sophisticated work done on how we can move to 100% renewable energy this century. When we will get there is a matter of much debate internationally, but even the International Energy Agency is looking at ramping up renewable energy, not just because of the climate issue, but because we want in South Africa to develop the industries that will give us the jobs to be a leader in something like concentrating solar thermal power.
Mr. Kenny?
Yes, Richard speaks about a long experience and the facts about renewables, which is perfectly true. We've been running wind turbines for 30 years or so, and so we can see what's happened, and it's been a disaster. Very expensive, very unreliable, not particularly good for the environment because it uses such enormous amounts of resources in a very wasteful way. What we want to do is use the gifts of nature in a proper, harmonious sort of way. So solar and wind, as I say, are very good for certain applications, which I've mentioned, solar water heating, small-scale supply of electricity, but they're useless for baseload. They do no good whatsoever.
No, let's get the position from the DG then.
So what you want to do for baseload is work with nature, not try and go against nature. And what nature offers you in nuclear power is a very safe, reliable, large-scale economic source of power.
Okay, let's get government position on those matters, especially maybe starting with the issue of expense, because the other argument is that renewable energy, at least at an introductory phase, is quite expensive.
Yeah, I'll just give you a practical example. Our indication is that the CSP, for example, it's going to be costing us at least about R2.19 per kilowatt hour at a generation point. Okay, and yet the coal-fired power plants at the most, at the new power, I'm talking now about the new Medupi and the new Kusile, we expect them to be at 71 cents per kilowatt hour at the generation point. And basically, what it simply says to you is that renewable energy is expensive. And when we modeled, we were aware that renewable energy is expensive, just as much as probably nuclear also is expensive when we start building it. But what we are saying, we need to secure the environment for the future. So in that case, we need an energy mix that is going to ensure that we move into that secure, or rather into that clean environment into the future without necessarily killing the economy of this country. We still need the mines. We still need the manufacturing and all those kind of industries. They need secure base load and over the whole day. Because, by the way, unfortunately, if you look at our demand profile lately, it's clear that there has been a reduction in those big peaks that we used to have. So basically what it simply says that we need, therefore, to support the demand that is required by the industry. So for us to be able to do that, we need to make sure that we provide stability